You say if you're going to stew, braise, slow cook, you'll want to use dry herbs instead of fresh.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Well, dry herbs have the concentrated flavor, but the texture's different. It's going to be a lot different than a fresh herb, which is going to have that crisp bite. This is, well, obviously it's dried. When you're going to use like a long cooking process, a dried herb is good because it's not going to wilt and wither, and the flavor is not going to dissipate. It's going to extract from the herb and infuse itself with whatever you're using, like using dried oregano in tomato sauce. I mean, that's classic, but it's fresh oregano just wouldn't work as well. I mean, you can use it obviously, but you're not going to get the power of the oregano. With other things like stews and things, it's the same thing. You can add some stems of fresh herbs, but overall, I would suggest using the dried for these. You would just end up with little bits of the fresh herb left, wilted, brown, and that's not what you want.
Anything you can tell me about how to store these?
Yeah, for dried herbs, you want to keep them in an airtight container and away from the sunlight. I've talked before about growing your own herbs, and when you can dry them yourself, and it's easier and it's better than buying them already dried. For drying, you can put them between two filters in front of a box fan, or you can hang them upside down. I mean, our ancestors have been doing that for years. Put them in the sun, let them dry out that way. Try to keep them in as large a form as possible, and then crush them in your hand or in a spice grinder right before you use them. That way you're going to get the maximum flavor. If you go ahead and grind them completely, or if you buy powdered, you're going to lose a lot of the flavor. It's just going to kind of not evaporate, but it's not going to be there as much as if you had gotten the whole the whole herb itself.
What should you keep on hand all the time?
Well, I don't use a lot of dried spices, or dried herbs, but I would say the necessities would be oregano, bay leaf, some rosemary. Sage is really good to use dried around Thanksgiving. Other than that, whatever you have left over from your harvest, from your herb garden that I hope you've planted, you can just dry those and have those on hand.
Your first recipe is on chipotle herb roasted turkey breast.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that.
Well, I mean, you can make a rub out of spices or herbs or any type of flavoring like that. This uses just a melody of dried herbs as well as chipotle in adobo, which you will buy in a can, and they have quite a bit of heat. They're reconstituted peppers that are in the smoky sauce, and they're really tasty. When you buy the can and you open it, you're only probably going to use one or two of the peppers, and there's several more in there. Pop them into a zip-top bag and freeze them until you need them again, instead of throwing away the rest of the can. That way, you'll have them. This recipe calls for 2 with just a little bit of the juice, whatever's sticking to it or whatever you want to add. The more peppers you put in it, the spicier it's going to be. And rub it on your turkey breast or turkey roast, however you want to do it. And this will also work for pork. It would work for poultry. Not so sure about beef, but you could try it. And it's you just rub it on and then you roast it, and the flavor is going to intensify, and you're really going to get that in the turkey when you eat it.
And then we have rosemary focaccia.
Mm-hmm. Focaccia is really good. It's one of my favorite breads. You start out with a base that you can let ferment from 4 hours up to 8 hours, and that way you get that yeasty flavor that is so good in breads. You start out with that, let it go, and then once that's done, you add it to the rest of the ingredients. You add a little olive oil, and make sure you don't forget the salt, or it's going to be awful. A salt in yeasted breads doesn't. It's not just the flavor that it helps with, but it helps to control the yeast. So when you're mixing it up, you add the yeast first, and you add the salt after a few minutes of kneading in the mixer, and that's going to help to control the growth of the yeast. With this, you don't have to knead it by hand, and that makes it a lot easier. It's a good bread for beginners, actually, and just let it rise and you'll see it. I mean, just within a half hour how much it grows, and just make sure you let it go all the way, because the more you let it go, the more flavor you're going to get. But once it starts to recede, that means the yeast are suffocating and you need to do something else, pour it into the pan or punch it down or something like that. But it's great. In this one I used dried rosemary. You can use any kind of dried herbs. You can put stuff in it like olives or cheese or anything. and it's really good with a little kosher salt on the top.